It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Stories. As you've been following us, we have been interviewing women leaders in the private equity space, mergers and acquisition space, venture capital space, an area that we really haven't talked about in past in our series. So it was really exciting for me to delve in and meet new and different women who've navigated these spaces. Today, I have an amazing woman, somebody who I know by just connecting through her success story, we're making a lifelong connection. Sherry Orel is a seasoned leader with 25 plus years experience working with brands and building entrepreneurial organizations through new and organic growth, partnerships, strategic acquisitions, and exits. She has personally managed and overseen businesses delivering over $1.5 billion in revenue, secured and supported 25 plus add-on acquisitions and equity partnerships. She's an executive committee member and involved in 4 transactions that sold controlling interest for over $1 billion. More than anything, Sherry is smart, lovely, and a pleasure to speak with, and a woman that I have had the joy of getting to know. Sherry, thanks for joining me here today.
Thank you, Ivy.
So how did you get into this whole thing about you're also part of STS Capital. I wanted to mention that. How did you get into this space of building businesses, selling businesses, mergers and acquisition? Share a little bit of your backstory because it happens to be fascinating.
Yes, so I did not take the traditional path to the corporate office that I think most CEOs have. I grew up in a small town about an hour south of Chicago in Illinois. And if you drive an hour south of Chicago, you're no longer in a suburb. You go through a lot of cornfields to get to my hometown. So I didn't have a lot of career aspirations. Even going to college was not something my family talked about, could have afforded to do, was not the expected path. So I really graduated high school and started to try to figure out a way to support myself. That was my main goal, is to grow up, be a productive member of society, and figure it out as I went along. So I was pretty fearless, I think, in a lot of my endeavors. I had an athletic background, so I was used to putting myself out there with sports. And so I think, viewed this whole idea of a career through the same sort of figure it out competitive lens. And my first job, I was 19 years old as a receptionist at a marketing company that turned out to be a very small and recently acquired division of News Corporation, a much bigger company that I actually had heard of. And through just a series of questions of how hard can it be, right? So receptionist turned into bringing a computer up to the front desk, turned into a promotion into client services, eventually into sales. And eventually when I left News Corp 9 years later, I was running a Northeastern division, at the time with probably in today's equivalent, about a $75 million territory. And so
wow.
just putting myself in situations and being a quick study and figuring out once I was in the room, and keep going until I didn't give up until I had the result that I wanted. But it was very just serendipitous. I think I found myself in an industry that was ripe for promotion from within. And I aligned myself internally with the right people that could mentor me along the way. And I took those lessons and applied them. And here I am today.
I think it's an important piece to align yourself with the right mentors and then listen and take the action.
Absolutely. And there wasn't a ton of female mentors. I did have one early on. I actually just spoke to her last week. We're still friends 30 plus years later. And she was an anomaly even at the time. We're talking the late 80s, if I date myself. And she was at the top of her food chain. Remember?
I remember that time.
Bad hair, but
bad hair. It's the time I got into printing. Obviously, we knew each other.
Exactly. We were circling around each other. But this woman in particular, her name was Gail Sharp. She grew up, actually her education was early childhood, but she found herself as well in the sales role, and she was running circles around the guys and had this little army of people that she had collected as she built bigger and bigger portfolio businesses with her accounts. And I just took everything in like a sponge. She was scary, right? And she expected a lot. She was often viewed as intimidating because she didn't put a lot of frosting on some things. And I watched, and I saw some differences as to how she would interact in certain situations that was often very similar to how her male counterparts would engage, the powerful senior counterparts. But the words used to describe her behaviors just often had a much less desirable connotation, right? So instead of being decisive, she wasn't decisive and direct. She was, emotional and bitchy, right? So it was just a really unfair labeling, I think, at the time across the board for many of those women executives that paid the pass for us. Yeah, absolutely. But my eyes were wide open, and I took my lumps from her when I deserved them. And there were many times where I learned tough lessons that I still remember to this day. But I really appreciated the effort that she put into my personal development. So she was one of my early mentors for sure.
So in this journey, let's just talk about a few of your accomplishments. So from there, from the late 80s, when we both cut our teeth in starting to learn business,
yes.
What was your next navigation? Because you go for it.
Yeah, I took a sales path. That seemed to be one of the hardest areas of any business to build well, is to build a good sales organization. So when you find somebody that's got the discipline and the personality to do it and do it well, that opens a lot of doors. So I got the opportunity to learn from the inside, and being a salesperson, depending on what you're selling, often the best salespeople really understand what happens when you push that red button, right? If you're out there and you're just selling from a presentation and your job is to close the deal, and then you hand it off to somebody in an operational role, and you don't really understand what happens, that doesn't put you in the position to be creative. So if you know how something gets executed or built, then you have enough of information to realize where the flexibility might actually lie. So if we can do this, maybe we can also do that. And that might be new and innovative and exciting to my client. And now you're having partnership conversations about what could be and what you could build together, versus it being very transactional. And so I had the fortune of selling certain services that did have that level of customization and flexibility and fun around, ideating together. And so I built a trusting relationship with a lot of my early clients. And then once you
and I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump
ahead.
in a little bit here, because clearly we came up that same path, because I came up through sales, and I agree with you 1,000%. When you're not selling based on a presentation, when you're selling based on true knowledge, you can be creative. And more than that, you have the ability to get clients for a lifetime, because you truly, it's not a transactional sale. It's a relationship-based sale. It's a sale based on core values, as well as intrinsic knowledge around something that your customer relies on you and will tap your brain, and you can have conversations that is not just about the sale. It's so much deeper.
Yeah.
And that was my same path. I'll always say, back in my early days of peddling printing, I never showed up with a portfolio, and people are like, well, where's your portfolio? I said, it's irrelevant. They're like, well, how is it irrelevant? I need to see what you do. I'm like, no, I need to see what you need. And then I'm going to bring back what I do that's relevant.
Exactly.
Exactly. So it's an important piece of sales that I wanted to highlight, Sherry, because I don't want it to get lost in the sauce today.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the work that we do at STS Capital is to take businesses and find strategic buyers when they're ready to do that. And there's a whole process for that that's very much sales. But within my coaching business, which is Next Level Catapult, we understand the path to influencing, right? There's a lot of people that bristle at the idea of being called a salesperson, sometimes internal client services people, et cetera, because the idea of sales sounds icky. It sounds stressful. It sounds maybe like something I don't want to be doing. But the idea of learning the skills of influencing and being able to tell a story in a compelling way that allows somebody to make their own buying decision versus tricking somebody into buying something they don't want. It's like, this isn't the vacuum cleaner salesman knocking on your door, right? So that's really where I think, and I've said this before in other keynotes that I've given, I feel like my path to the corner office coming up through sales gave me a huge competitive advantage because so many of my counterparts came up through a finance or an operation track, and they think linearly at the business and the business challenges through financial and spreadsheet and operational and what can't be done. Whereas I've come up through innovation, creativity, influence, people skills of what can be done. And I could learn what I needed to do to read a P&L. I could learn the details of the operations and the ramifications, but I've seen my counterparts struggle trying to really understand what their sales and marketing people are trying to tell them, because it's just a much more difficult skill to learn once you've landed in the corner office than some of this other blocking, and very important, but some of the other blocking and tackling things. It's just a matter of, applying a little diligence and spending some time on the weekends and reading, and you can get up to speed on some of the finance and operations a little easier than sales. So I think it's definitely served me well.
So the one thing I have so much to talk to you about, I have to be honest. When we start talking about sales, my natural inclination is to talk about the relationships we build, because I think sales transcends the relationships. And you and I have had discussions on the importance of relationships in our careers and as we've built businesses and how we've made. So what have been some of those impactful relationships for you, and how have they been valuable to you in your career?
Yeah. I mean, aside from the mentors and the great list of people, many of whom I respect immensely that I've worked alongside and helped build businesses, one in particular is the power of a network. And about 9 years ago, I joined an organization called YPO, that stands for Young Presidents Organization. It's about 34,000 global CEOs. You have to qualify to get in. And it's a very giving, learning group. So these are people that join not only to learn from each other, but to share. So that has been a major transformational experience for me. I wish I would have had it in my career. If I'd had it in my career probably 10 years earlier, I would have become an entrepreneur instead of an intrapreneur running other people's companies, much longer than it took me. But those relationships have been really just invaluable to me. With any organization, you get out of it what you put into it. So I could be writing my dues check and, barely phoning in a relationship, but I just chose to really dive in head first and over time get to know a lot of people, and the learning and the support that I've gotten from that type of an organization has been important. And there are others that are out there, but I happen to really enjoy the time that I'm spending with YPO.
YPO has been around a long, long time, and it's a valued organization for leaders. I mean, I will go back in the day, way pre-printing. But I remember, because of YPO, and working for a woman leader who was involved in YPO. When I first heard about it, I was probably 23 years old, which was just recently for those of us who care to not count. But it brought me on interviews and meeting people, even as just at that time, I was somebody's assistant, and the doors that opened to me through that. So I love that. And it's, and a piece of what I love that you're saying is, it's not about writing the dues check. It's about how you show up. It's about how you truly spend the time connecting. And you just had a great trip through this.
I did. We just took 19 female CEOs and our teenage boys on a 5-day adventure in Iceland that included snowmobiles and glacier hikes and ATVs and scavenger hunts. And some of us had some bonus days of flying over active volcanoes. And it was just the Blue Lagoon. It was everything, and it was a great experience to surround yourself with true peers, other female moms who are also trying to run companies, and get our boys together and have them realize that while they might be a unicorn back home as one of the few or only people in their friend group that's got a mom that's, a president or CEO of a company, they now realize that there are others out there, that are dealing with the fact that maybe we aren't there at every school pickup, and there's not always fresh baked cookies every day when you get home from school, but there's other gifts and challenges that come with being the son of a powerful woman.
And I will say, I think those boys were incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by really amazing, powerful, strong leaders. I have to ask you, what has surprised you in this journey? So we're both kind of outing ourselves with we're peers, we've come up in interesting journeys. What has surprised you in your journey?
When you come up through the ranks at an organization, it's always difficult to go from being a peer group to then being a leader of people who you used to maybe go to lunch with and complain about the boss, and now you are the boss. And that becomes very challenging as you do climb the ladder. You're often leaving other people behind. There are people that maybe supported you along the way that you're now passing. And sometimes that doesn't feel good for them. Other times they're very excited for you. And we all take these things differently, but eventually you get to that, top, you get to that corner office, and they say that it's lonely at the top, and I think we could spend more than the 20 minutes that we have talking about what that means.
We could do that for a few hours, Sherry.
We could talk about that. And that's not, I think a lot of times it's that I alone ultimately am responsible for the outcome, no matter whose job is what. I'm the one that the private equity or the VC firm or the investors are looking at, or even the family, if you're running a family business, or yourself, if you're staring yourself at the mirror. But the dynamic of relationships definitely changes as your careers progress. When we're younger, you kind of go from that post-college 20s, like I spend all my time with everybody in college, and so now you're my friend. So now I'm spending 8 to 12 or 14 hours a day, used to be, by the way, in an office. So we're all together. So we're going hanging out on the weekends, and we know each other's personal stuff. And as we all mature and get lives and married and families and careers take us in different directions, those relationships really change. And so I've had to learn, really the difference between professional friendships and personal friendships, because there's just a period of time where they're so blended. And so really keeping that closeness so that we all enjoy each other, but with enough of a professional spin to it, so that when the inevitable happens, one or both of you move on from that job, and those, weekly calls go to monthly calls, go to quarterly, go to Christmas cards. You can really enjoy and appreciate those relationships while you have them and what you learn from them. And then move on and take all of those lessons and move on to your next situation to apply those learnings. So that's definitely something that I've seen ebb and flow through the 30-year career of professional friendships and partnerships as they've evolved.
Yeah, and I think professional friendships and partnerships, there's something from people come into our lives at different times for different reasons. And I always, as things transform, as things evolve, I'll always say, there's something I'm going to learn from this, and there's something that's going to impact me from this. And that's always, I try to raise my level of awareness to know it then, and not have to wait for it to go by to realize it, if that makes sense.
For sure. And also, what am I contributing? Right. Yeah. So when you get to a certain level professionally, you're giving a lot more than you're receiving. Right. That's just the nature of it. You're advising, you're directing, you're having your one-on-ones. They're coming to you, asking you things, you're directing. So it's a very wonderful gift to be able to give, but it could also be draining. And that's something that, that legacy that you're leaving behind as well. I've had multiple people come back to me, a decade or more later that I've worked with, sharing a story or some sort of impact that I had on them. And most of the time I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't remember the details of the specific conversation, but, they note that as a meaningful professional growth experience for them. So so those things are definitely things that we can take with us when we part.
Exactly. And it's amazing. Sometimes people stay more present in your life, and sometimes it takes it takes a smaller piece, right? Some are still, it's so funny. I still speak to my former business partner from we were partners from 97 to 2010, so saw each other 5 days a week. And we still speak usually before work, probably about 3 to 4 mornings a week. Just that's who we are. It's our, and so it's interesting. And I think there's value of the awareness level.
Yeah. And right now, I have 3 business partners on my coaching business. One of them, all 3 of them, we've worked together before, but one of them we've counted, I think we've worked together 7 times. Not always consecutively. We worked together at a company and then went our ways, and then we came back together, and it ebbs and flows. So there are those relationships that are recurring and kind of evergreen, regardless of where you are. And then there are others, as you said, they served a purpose for one or both of you at the time, and they were beautiful for what they were.
So Sherry, in thinking forward of leaving legacy, what piece of advice or a tip you might leave for our listeners, or the women leaders who lean into her success story? What should we know, and how can that impact us as leaders?
Sure. I do a lot of one-on-one growth work with CEOs and presidents, particularly women. And I do begin to see some common patterns, not within everybody, but one of them that's been my more recent laser focus. I don't want to say it's a pet peeve, but it's this idea around imposter syndrome. And that concept has been around for a while, of course, and it seems to be a little bit of a cop out anytime somebody feels a little bit of out in front of their skis. It's this imposter syndrome. But I'm a big stickler on words matter. The words that we think, the words that we say, manifest into hardcore unconscious identity. And if you double down on the idea that I fill in the blank, I have imposter syndrome, you're reinforcing that negative outcome, right? So the idea, I tell people, imposter syndrome doesn't exist, right? It only exists if you give it power. And then often I'll challenge somebody who says they have that, and it's usually, oh, I've gotten a promotion, or I took a new job, and I really don't know what I'm doing and I'm terrified. That's really the underlying of imposter syndrome. But I'll challenge them to look at their own track record and only then decide whether your insecurity is justified. Because more often than not, through a conversation, someone can realize that they have at least a 90% track record of getting into every situation, figuring it out through a series of trials and errors and recalibrations. And then as long as the end destination wasn't failure, meaning like they didn't stop after a failure, if they persevered, the end result was some level of success. So the ability to challenge them, because there's literally no evidence to support the probability of failure, right? Zero evidence. So your fact, you're like full of beans, right? You have zero evidence to support why you are in over your head or incapable of figuring this out, because every other situation from the time you learned to walk until today has just been a series of small failures and course corrections to get you to your goal.
I agree with that wholeheartedly on so many levels. Number one, the more we put anything out in the universe, the more it's going to come to fruition. So I believe in the power of language. I'm always talking to my clients about the power of language. I was like, lose the word try, lose the word hard, lose the word would. I'm trying to get this done. No, you're not. It's like, I'm getting it done. This is the time frame I'm looking to get it done with. Do I have to adjust the time frame? That might be.
Yeah. Even Yoda said hard, there is no try, do.
There is no
right?
try, there is do. So I agree with you. And I agree, the more we put out those big hurdles for ourselves, the harder those mountains are going to be to climb. The more we minimize and we look at, wow, you know what? I didn't know how to walk. I didn't know how to do my first job. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know how to run a company either until I started learning to run a company. And it's the willingness to do and using that way that is the golden ticket, and eliminating and alleviating and putting aside anything that gets in your way and staying in the next step and the next step in the action.
Yeah.
So I love that piece.
And the other thing is take the win, right? So when you have worked on something or accomplished something or achieved something, take the win, right? And this could be either slowing down enough to actually celebrate the victory in some sort of a mini ceremony. And the mini ceremony could just be, I'm going to go down and make myself a cup of coffee and I'm going to revel in this moment, or you can take a trip. But I've met far too many leaders and certainly women that are more like, okay, great, we've done that. Now what? And there's no celebration. And then even personal growth win. I was working with a client a couple of weeks ago, and we were identifying which growth work she wanted to focus on next. And she brought up this concept of generosity, because this has apparently been something that she's worked on for many years, decades. And people say to her, her staff will often say, wow, you're so generous. And she was challenging that definition because she's like, no, I'm actually not naturally generous. This is something I've had to work on my whole life. And so I want you to know that I'm not really generous. You might think I am. This is just me working really hard, and you can work hard too when you want to change. And I was stopped her and I'm like, listen, when have you arrived on this generosity mission? Like if you are as appropriately generous as you need to and should be in most settings, you can go ahead and say that you're generous. It's okay, right? You should take the win and stop saying, I am not a naturally generous person, to I am appropriately generous. And now let's refocus all that energy into something you haven't already mastered, but take the win.
Take the win, celebrate yourself, own those successes. Sherry, I can't thank you enough for being joining me today on Her Success Story. This has been a fabulous conversation, and this has been a joy in getting to know you.
You too. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And listeners, this is always this time in Her Success Story when I say, take a moment and take a breath. What was your takeaway? What is your aha moment from listening and joining us today in Sherry and I's conversation? Write it down, put it in your phone, on your computer, on a sticky note. Does not matter, but write it down and then make one decision. And that is, what action are you going to take for yourself for that aha moment? Thank you again for joining me on Her Success Story. See you next time.